The Liberal Democrats had a disappointing result in the Euro elections, as Labour support sank to a shocking 15%. Why weren't the Lib Dems the natural recipients for all those protest votes? Is it because Nick Clegg has marched his party to the right? Have they become part of the Westminster establishment that took such a drubbing from angry voters? I asked Nick Clegg those questions. You've become a more right-wing party.
In what way?
You dropped some of the things that are totemic. Now, you may say there are complicated
Like
reasons
what?
why. I think dropping the top rate of tax
That was before my
totemic.
time. Sorry, I suppose,
Yes,
well,
but nevertheless, you were part of that move of the party. The nuclear disarmament. You're no longer campaigning to join the euro. There are a whole lot of things in which, for instance, you want to cut public spending. You wanted to cut 20 billion.
No,
you say shrink the government.
No, we didn't.
These sound quite Tory.
If I bridle a little bit, it's because while I have read this characterisation for a good year and a half now, there is literally nothing to sustain it. What we have always said, what I've always said, is I'm a liberal progressive to my fingertips, whether it's on internationalism, whether it's on social justice, whether it's on constitutional reform, whether it's on fairness in the sort of broadest sense in the way in which we do politics, in the way in which we run our society. We have always said, and I think we've been proved right by events, that being obsessed by the upper rate of tax that you apply to a tiny number of people at the top, which generates no money at all, is a complete red herring.
It's a blue herring not to do it. What it looks like is what it was taken as was you putting up a blue flag instead of a red flag. You moving
what we've done instead
is
radical things for the things that I actually think make a difference for people, is what you do at the bottom end. We are now the only party saying radically rebalance the tax system by raising the personal allowance for the basic rate of income tax, so no one is paying any income tax on the first £10,000 that they earn. That would lift about 4 million people out of paying income tax altogether. It would give about £700 to the vast majority of people on modest and median income. We're the only party saying that. We've been working on this for months.
I understand that.
And I'm not going to apologise for us not sort of getting sucked into what I think is an almost academic debate about the noises.
It's not academic because you've been using it as something totemic. When you did your cold calling, Nick Clegg calls hundreds of thousands of homes around the country on an automatic telephone. The pitch was, we are the only party who are committed to cutting your taxes. Well, it may be that it was a very fair way of doing it, and I think it's not an unfair way of doing it that you've proposed. But basically, you're proposing cutting 20 billion off spending and telling voters that you are the, as it were, more Tory tax-cutting party. That was your message.
No, we didn't. Honestly, with respect, it's such an outrageous mischaracterisation. What is not progressive about cutting the tax burden on people on low and middle incomes? It is impeccably progressive. We have a tax system which for years, under Labour, for 12 years, has been squeezing people dry at the bottom end while providing £40 billion worth of tax avoidance loopholes to rich individuals and large corporate people who can employ an army of lawyers and accountants.
So you think that the rich can just get away with it and there's nothing we can do? If you try and put up a higher rate of tax, you said, well, they just won't pay anything. Why should politicians accept that?
I think it's deeply cynical, for instance, to hoodwink people on the so-called left that you're doing something good by putting 50p upper rate of income tax on earnings over 150,000 and then build in a massive tax loophole where you keep capital gains at 18% and upper rate of income tax. It's just a standing incentive for rich people to pay themselves in capital gains rather than pay that 50p.
So would you make the capital gains rate the same as the income tax rate? Would you keep it at 50p now it's there?
I don't think we're going to, it's certainly not a priority to reverse it, but it generates almost no money. What you do need to do, what I do feel passionate about, is you close these huge loopholes, massive loopholes. Capital gains is a classic one, which cynically, Darling and Brown kept in place because they thought they could placate people in their own party, on the left of the Labour Party. Oh, look, we're doing this great totemic thing on 50p, and you leave this great loophole in place which people can easily fiddle. So when we ring, whether it's a cold calling or otherwise, and say we will reduce taxes for people who shouldn't be paying such high taxes, I unapologetically believe that is both progressive and I think popular.
You've made a good pitch that your party's cleaner than the rest, and yet do you think to some extent you're going to be contaminated just like all the others, a sense that all those Westminster people are all just the same?
I agree with you. I think that for a lot of people who don't follow the ins and outs of politics, frankly, very rarely even distinguish between one politician or another. Just think, we're all playing on all our houses, we're all part of the same thing, we're all tarred by the same brush. Yeah, I think there's a very strong likelihood of that.
And isn't it a problem for you, though, that some people in your own party have been in trouble too? Lord Reynard, your long-time most influential and successful campaigner, had to stand down with a bit of a shadow over his reputation. The big one, really, is the 2.4 million from a donor who turned out to be a fraudster. What about returning that money? How can you really claim to be cleaner than the rest and yet not return that cash?
Firstly, I don't want to get diverted on this, but I mean, Chris Reynard and I talked about this months ago. He, for personal reasons, decided he was going to stand down a long time ago. On Michael Brown, who you're alluding to, I mean, this is before my time, but I've looked into it with some sort of care. It's sort of all about where does retrospective justice come in or not. I mean, can we be held culpable for not doing things that we couldn't possibly have known at the time?
Is this the best chance there's ever been for getting a change in the electoral system? This great spasm of disgust and revulsion against Westminster politics, do you think it really can be translated into reform of the electoral system, or is that just a way really of diverting from a revolutionary moment when people really want just to knock everybody's heads off?
Yes, I think it's the biggest chance, certainly in my political lifetime. How do you do it? By explaining over and over again those connections, the connections between the abuses in the expense system and the arrogance of unaccountable power. And I passionately believe there's an intimate connection. If you're on your toes, if you're kept on your toes, you're worried you're going to lose your seat, worried that you're being scrutinised all the time. You can't rest on your laurels. You can't just assume that you're always going to be in power forever and anon. Then I think by definition, it's just a natural human reaction. You kind of look over your shoulders more. You keep your nose clean. You make sure that you do things properly. Of course, this doesn't always work. Of course, you'll get rotten apples in whatever system. PR itself doesn't suddenly turn sinners into saints. But I think it does keep politics more honest because it puts people in charge and it keeps politicians insecure about their position. And I think that's right. If you've got the privilege of representing people, you've got to be insecure that you're
So what's the mechanism? How do we seize this moment and turn it into something that actually happens? Because until now, everybody's said, oh, proportional representation, it's anorak stuff, dry, can't engage the people out there. People out there think it's very boring, or else it's just self-interested Lib Dem talk. How do you change that into something that really breaks the system?
By firstly explaining the connection. If you don't want rotten politicians, you've got to change the rotten rules, and you've got to be in charge. The voters, not the politicians. Because we have a system at the moment. You know the facts better than almost anybody else. You've got a Labour government in power, 22% of the eligible vote. Wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. It puts politicians in charge, breeds arrogance, breeds secrecy. Secondly, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Roy Jenkins did the work. I happen to be an advocate of single transferable vote. It's my preferred option. But I recognise that Roy Jenkins did that work. We did a lot of heavy lifting under the impetus of what Tony Blair promised then in 97, 98 to lay the groundworks for a wider consensus for electoral reform. So let's not revisit, let's not reopen it.
So how do we get it out there? Let's say we go for the Roy Jenkins system.
I think you have to have a referendum. So you have to have a referendum.
At the time of the next election?
Well, I think tactically that's a very unwise idea. I think if you hold a referendum on this at the same time of election, inevitably gets snarled up with party politics because the Conservatives are so implacably opposed to it. So I think if you have it on the same day as the general election, you have a real risk that it becomes so fractured and snarled up with what will be a very, very aggressive election campaign that it's almost difficult
But how could the Labour Party call a referendum now in its last days, perhaps, that didn't just look like a form of gerrymandering and the answer would be no, this is a Labour Party fix trying to hang on by their fingernails?
I think the blunt truth is it's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult for a government appearing to be sort of stumbling towards the finishing line, been in power for 12 years, internally riven with dissent, demoralised.
If this is the moment, if this is the first moment, it is in a sense almost a revolutionary moment in terms of attitudes towards policy and people want politics, people wanting a real change. How can you all get out there and really convert that public indignation into an effective campaign for PR?
I think you need a referendum which takes place on a different date to the general election. I think we should get on with it, do it as soon as possible, and if that can be, if you like, independently recommended from Gordon Brown's committee or whatever, all fine and well. But
are you going to join Gordon
Brown?
Brown's committee, the one with the rather Soviet name, the Democratic Renewal
the 5-year
Council,
plan for
5-year plan?
Democratic
Have you been invited to join?
Not to my knowledge. But no, I'm
Would you join it?
Oh yeah, I'm happy to join any group that is sincere and ambitious in looking at political renewal. It's one of the things that brought me into politics.
One of the problems, one of the reasons why people perceive Westminster politics as deadly is that everybody has congregated on the centre ground as a sort of small sixpence of space. And you've got Cameron pretending to be on the centre ground, you've got Labour moved onto the centre ground, you squeezed in the middle. Some people have teased you, called you Cameron light. What's needed is other parties. Well, PR would give us that, but what are the Liberal Democrats doing in that little cigarette paper between them? Why aren't you out to the left providing a radical alternative that is quite clearly a place for Labour voters to go? It's the Labour voters who are desperate. Tory voters are quite happy.
Can I just slightly correct this characterisation of a little cigarette slate? I mean, 6 million votes at the last general election, more than any other Liberal party in Europe, is not a cigarette paper sliver of support. Controlling more of the big cities in this country.
I meant the ideological space.
Well, no, the ideological. Let's look at the ideological space. What have the Liberal Democrats done over the last few years on some of the big issues? The only party to oppose the Iraq War, the only party to speak with consistency on the erosion of civil liberties, the only party to be consistent about our internationalist European vocation, the only party to sound the alarm about a deregulated, greedy banking sector in the City of London, the only party to speak out on foreign policy issues like Gaza when everyone else was silent. The only party to prepare to sort of break ranks with these cosy rules here in Westminster, whether it's Michael Martin or otherwise. I think that for people who want a strong progressive voice that isn't hidebound by the kind of tedious, narrow terms of trade between the Conservative and Labour parties, they're getting it. I think they're getting it. We've talked about taxation.
You are left of Labour. Are you saying you're to the left of Labour? Because people would prick up their ears if you did say that.
Well, I tell you what, I've always rejected. If I was a left-wing progressive, I'd be part of the awkward squad, the Labour Party. I'm a liberal progressive. I don't fit, dare I say it.
Triangulate.
No, I don't fit, dare I say it, into the neat perception of what it is that makes a progressive. I'll tell you why. Because for too long, I think, because of the dominance of the Labour Party on the progressive side of British politics, which goes right back to the early 20th century and so on, what has gone wrong in progressive politics is that there has been an association between being progressive and left-wing with using the power of the central state, the apparatus of the central state, to prosecute, to pursue those socially progressive aims. I think that's wrong. It's one of the reasons I'm a liberal. It's why I'm a liberal progressive. I think one of the things that's gone wrong, why social mobility has slowed, why inequality has increased, why child poverty has not shifted, why I'm an MP in a city where if you're a child born in the poorest neighbourhood in Sheffield, still today you will die 14 years before a child born in the wealthiest neighbourhood in Sheffield. Why we still have the grotesque spectacle of children from affluent backgrounds but not so bright overtaking children by the age of 6 or 7. The reason why is because the left, the self-appointed left, has felt that the only way to provide social progress is through a sort of top-down, centralised system. So I think that needs to stop. If it had worked, we'd be one of the most socially mobile societies on the planet. We're not.
Are you preparing for power? Are you expecting to share power at the next election? And is it an absolute condition that you have to get PR or a PR referendum before you even consider supporting anybody to stay in power, let alone a coalition? Is that your bottom line, absolutely unbreakable?
Yes, I want power. I think I'm part of a generation of Liberal Democrats who really won't be content with just being proved right or jumping up and down on the sidelines. I think there is a great fluidity in British politics. The old glaciers of the duopoly of British politics.
But your bottom line?
No, I'm not going to reduce my so-called bottom line to only one condition because I don't think...
You mean you might sustain another party in power without getting PR?
No, I would
not. Because a lot of people will vote for you this time saying, well, I don't know what I think about those Lib Dems, but if you vote for them this time, you might never need to vote for them again because we'll get PR and you can then vote for a multiplicity.
In a sense, I'm being more ambitious and more demanding than you're suggesting. I don't want people just to vote for the Liberal Democrats because we support PR. I want them to vote
But
for us
people want to
because
know that they will get it from you if they do.
they won't only get that. They will get a restoration of civil liberties. They will get political change. They will get a complete step change in the way in our attitude towards our membership
I understand
of the
that,
European Union.
but are you absolutely sure that you will not make a deal unless it also includes, of course it's not the only thing you care about, but is that your bottom line in terms of you won't do a deal unless you get a PR deal?
I won't, as it happens, I'm actually not spending very much time thinking about deals because it's sort of complete futile academic sort of
Well, it won't
crystal
be.
ball game. It might change. If circumstances change, then we look at it. But first what we do is put our pitch to the British people as clearly as possible, which, yes, is about political reform, including PR, but it's about a whole lot besides.
But for a lot of Labour
it's about-
people, the pitch would be, I'll vote for those Lib Dems because we might then get
Polly,
PR.
I'd like to think
know
they'd also
that.
vote for us because we want a fairer tax system, because of the reasons that I've described. Because they also will have a fairer school system. And that unlike Labour, we will say,
Yeah, but you sound as if you're sliding off it, as
no,
if
no,
it
no,
is...
no. What I'm refusing to do, which you're inviting me to do, is to say there's only one thing, and only
Well,
one
is
issue.
it one of 3 things or 5 things? But is it one of the things?
Of course. Oh no, sorry.
That
sorry.
you absolutely would not do a deal
Is
without a set of things that PR is one of them.
Is a fairer voting system, is political change, absolutely axiomatic to what I want Liberal Democrats to be in power for, to change. Of course. Is it the only thing? No. Our ambitions go much further than that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.